Welcome to the Sustain, Change and Grow podcast, where we discuss questions related to climate change and sustainable personal development with experts across different fields. I'm Dilara Salahova. I am currently working at the European Central Bank on sustainable finance topics, and I would like to emphasize that this podcast is not related to my work at the ECB. Instead, it is a part of my desire and effort to raise awareness about the importance of individual actions to address current environmental issues and to bring desired changes into one's life. In this episode, I'm happy to welcome Jakob Thomae, one of the leading global experts on sustainable finance and long-term risks. Jakob is also an entrepreneur with a track record of incubating commercial and non-commercial sustainability solutions. And one of Jakob's latest ventures that attracted my attention is MyFairMoney platform. And in this episode, we will talk about this platform, sustainable finance, and how everyone can align their investments with their values and their preferences. So, Jakob, a warm welcome to the Sustain, Change and Grow podcast.
Hi, nice to talk today.
Let's jump directly into the topic, as I think the topic of sustainable finance is either not well known or not well understood. And it will certainly be of great interest to many listeners. So can you start by explaining what sustainable finance is?
Well, some might think it's a bit of an oxymoron, right? Sustainability and finance are not the two words that people think of together typically, but sustainable finance is really the idea that when you allocate capital in economic system, that you do that from the vantage point both of optimizing risk return, but also optimizing some type of a social outcome, or effectively doing it in a way that maintains the sustainability of the economy. And that's the idea of sustainable finance. And there are obviously those within the world of sustainable finance that think this is a good idea because sustainable planet means that we can still make money in 100 years, right? And then there are those that just feel very strongly about sustainability as a good in and of itself and want to advance social or environmental causes.
Right. So, essentially, sustainable finance is a part of social responsible investments, right? And these social responsible investments or investing in line with your values that goes a long way to the history, right?
Yeah, so that's right. So, I mean, before we had sustainable finance as a concept, we really had this idea, which really comes from the 1990s, right? And you see that on the corporate side with corporate social responsibility and this idea, the Nike sweatshop scandal and so on, and then obviously the same kind of trends in finance. Now, the idea that we want to invest with our values goes perhaps back even further. You see, the 70s, 60s, some of the 60s movement, but it always had, I think, traditionally this idea of some sort of a value-based approach to how you invest. And I think it's since then really become more broad about actually wanting to wield the power that your money gives you, right? So it's not just aligning your investment with your values, because that means you don't invest in coal or child labor or whatever you don't like, but actually thinking about it beyond that and thinking, okay, I want to actually use my money as a source of power. And the same way I use that power when I go to the supermarket, I want to use that power when I also invest. And I think that's made sustainable finance, I think, definitely have, if you will, grown up or graduated from its early days of just social responsibility.
Right. So yeah, money is the power. So what is about the platform MyFairMoney? Why did you think of creating it?
Well, because we felt like that people weren't using their power, right? That's the core problem we had identified. Is, if you look at the European market, we think about companies and shareholders, maybe think billionaires and so on, but most European citizens have either a pension fund or insurance products, have their money in the bank, and behind every investment, behind every share, behind every bond, there is a person. Maybe there's a pension fund before that person, but at the end of that food chain, or there is a person. And we know that these people on the whole want to have values. And we know that on the whole, through surveys and other data, that they want to translate their values into what they do with their money. And the problem is they don't do that. We see that in a host of different ways. We see still a relatively small share of, sustainable finance type of products in the market in terms of retail investors picking them up. We see, when it comes to voting on shareholder resolutions, that when we vote for elections, 80% of voters vote for parties that support the Paris Agreement. When we have the same voting process in capital markets, it's 20%, 30%. Sometimes, if we're lucky, some resolutions pass. And that delta, that gap, is one that the MyFairMoney platform wants to fill or bridge effectively, right? Is to enable people to wield their power, as we just talked about. And the way we want to do that is through a couple of different things. First of all, there's a database out there on the platform where they can find different funds and maybe find their fund, see what that fund's sustainability profile looks like, see whether there are other funds that maybe have different sustainability profiles. But also another big, really important feature of the platform is to help actually citizens understand how they want to wield their power. Because, if I walk down the street and I said, you want to save the polar bears, you'd probably say, yeah, sure, why not? Let's go save the polar bears. It sounds like a good idea, but, or maybe you're not into polar bears, I don't know. But actually, it's one thing to say, I have values. Another thing to say, well, how do I actually want to express those values? So, one good example I'd always like to cite is we had a conversation with a couple of people in the focus groups we had set up before we set up the platform. And there's one person there, he's a very religious man. And what he really wanted was not to invest in alcohol. And that's what he wanted. That was his thing. He said, look, I'm not worried about a lot of the other stuff, but alcohol, that's for me. There's some other religious aspects there that I just don't want to invest in. And so for that person, obviously an ex-sin stock fund, in parlance, so stocks fund without gambling and alcohol and pornography, that's the right product for them. And then somebody else said, well, what I want to do is actually want to change the world with my money. And all of a sudden, then you're looking at a very different type of direction. And it's not just, do you want to be sustainable? Yes, no. And then, okay, perfect. Here's a sustainable fund off the shelf. There's actually nuances and layers to how we want to wield that power. And it's hard for us to navigate that space. So we have videos and questionnaires and just a bunch of different tools on our platform that we hope help people actually kind of figure out what they want to do, a little bit like those magazines in the 90s where you can check whether you're a good boyfriend or girlfriend, but perhaps with a little bit higher stakes.
Yeah, like if you're a good investor, if you're a good citizen, if you're using your money right.
Well, if you're curious about this question, go on our platform and we'll let you know.
So essentially, I see there are different indeed strategies of investing your money, right? So you can exclude certain products, or you can invest in specific products. Like, for example, you want to really support the green energy, and so you invest in those. Or you want to have an impact and reduce carbon emissions. And so your platform essentially helps to understand what you really want to do. And when you know what you want to do is where you should go and find the right products.
That's the idea. That's absolutely the idea. I think that's, you touched on an important point, which is the end bit, where you go, because at the moment, at least, we feel like we can only really effectively provide that kind of support if we don't sell anything. As soon as we start selling something on the platform, it becomes much more complicated to help people navigate the space, because we're obviously then tempted to steer them to whatever product it is that we're selling.
Yeah, conflict of interest.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm not suggesting that depends a little bit on what you're trying to sell. Maybe you're just trying to sell the support. But at the moment, that's a really important feature for us. And I think we'll stay with that approach, is to say, look, this is a non-commercial solution, which means we get a lot of emails from users saying, okay, thanks for the help. Now, can I buy that fund that I saw on your platform? I said, well, yeah, you can, but not with us, right? We're not your broker. We're not your investment advisor. We're just there to really entertain. I mean, maybe a little entertain, inform. I hope it's a little entertaining sometimes, but to inform and to help you navigate this space. And so that's the journey we're on. And And as you said, you go from figuring out what you want to do to then using that platform to help you get there, basically.
Yes. Do you think it's useful also to provide information actually where you can find those funds and some basic tips how to invest? Or do you think people are already financially literate enough to know this?
So we try and strike a right balance. I mean, we're always updating and improving things, right? So we try and find a balance, because once we actually tell people where they can buy things much more specifically, we have to be really careful about not tilting the playing field. You know, if you take like a specific fund, there are hundreds of thousands of brokers that could potentially intermediate that fund for you, right? So you have to be a little bit careful, I think, if depending on what you feature about showing that. But we do, I think sustainability in some ways is a transaction cost problem, right? We're in front of the recycling bins at the train station and holding something in our hand, and then we look at the images on the trash can and we're like, none of these images look like anything I'm holding in my hand. Which one do I put it in? And so that's the transaction cost problem of sustainability. It's always hard to figure out where you want to go. And that is something we're trying to reduce, but we also have to be a bit sensitive about, as I said before, some of those commercial conflicts of interest that might arise. People do wish they could immediately kind of buy and go, but I think everyone who's on our platform can get to, has that journey to go to a bank or to go to a broker and knows where to take that journey. But you'll try and have some videos about this process. So we have a little guide that they can take with them to the broker, right? And so they can go, all right, what questions are going to ask me? How can I respond to that? And so that's definitely the holistic approach to not just saying this is how sustainability works in finance, but also making sure that they can get to where they want to go. Right.
And is it riskier or more expensive to invest sustainably?
So, I mean, this is the short answer is no, basically, right? That's the short answer. There's some studies from the European Securities and Markets Association, which is basically the big European regulator that takes care of funds and all that. Yeah. And they've looked at some funds and say, look, this is basically more or less the same price. Now, obviously, there are some funds that are more expensive in certain asset classes. You're getting a bit higher costs, that also matters. So you can't say no way, never is it more expensive. But on the off-the-shelf products have really started to become more or less the same price point as the quote unquote normal products. Which is actually something that's different. If you buy the free-range eggs in the supermarket, you do have to put more money on the table. And that's not necessarily the case here for certain funds. But having said all that, when it comes to financial performance, that's where it gets a little tricky, because in principle, you could say, well, all these sustainable funds are doing actually integrating more information. And information is value in finance. And so you would expect that these funds to perform better. And I think there's some evidence to that effect. Where it gets tricky is where that information is used for non-financial objectives, right? If your goal is to, let's go back to our friend, the gentleman who didn't want to invest in alcohol stocks. That's not a decision based on financial considerations. And so that may be good because, I don't know, society changes and alcohol companies suffer, but it may be bad because we're living through a pandemic and a war and everyone starts drinking more because they're fed up. But, this is then something where you've made a non-financial decisions. And so at that point, you're on different terrain, if you will, about thinking about financial performance. But so that's, I feel like I'm not answering your question, but it is just not an easy question to answer. I think on the whole, if you're looking at really the broad range of funds, the type of additional risks that you're taking are negligible. And like with anything investing, you could outperform, you could underperform, and sustainability isn't necessarily going to be the X factor that determines that outcome. The key question for you is, are you doing it for sustainability risk purposes, in which case you're likely to outperform, or are you doing it because you're trying to integrate your extra values? And then it really depends what those values are and the cost of, those extra transaction costs of making that values become real.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying that in a way, the risk is not related to so risk factor and sustainability factor, they're not really related. So you may have two companies in the same sector having the same risk, but one will be more sustainable than the other.
That's right. And that is, that more sustainable company can have better governance, can have, they have lower carbon emissions. So when we have a carbon tax, they're not going to suffer as much, or they already have board diversity. And so they have more creative, forward-thinking, progressive boards that just mean that they drive more change, or they have, good social protections, which means when there's no labor regulation, they're already prepared for all this, right? So that may all be great for your investment. But we know the world isn't sustainable. And sometimes those kind of companies are doing the right thing, but they don't get financially rewarded. And then by extension, the same will be true immediately. And by
maybe
extension,
in
the same
the long
will be
term,
true. Yeah, exactly. But as Keynes famously said, in the long run, we're all dead. So and the way, the way the sustainability transformation is going, it's definitely too slow for my liking. But no, I think it's eminently reasonable to back to first principles, which is information is value, and what sustainable funds are trying to achieve is to take more information into account.
But then, isn't it surprising that the fees and for the sustainable funds, so essentially in sustainable investing, is not more expensive? Because to find those companies, funds should invest more in this information, which is not easy to assess either. Assess and access as well. So, and for me, it's a bit surprising that it's not a bit more expensive.
So I think the research kind of has more or less this conclusion that passive funds, right? So passive funds are funds where you basically set up an investment rule, which basically says how you should allocate the money. And then you sit back and let the investment rule do its thing. And then there's a computer that takes care of the transactions for you, right? So that's basically passive investing. And in that space, we're seeing the costs really align. And the reason for that is that the costs are so low and everything is so automated that even that extra bit of effort just isn't going to really drive up your overall costs that dramatically, just because it's so scaled, the whole thing, so automated that, you have to pay some extra data for environmental data or social or governance data. But, once you layer all those costs over to all your clients, then it becomes a couple of basis points and you save yourself the trouble of charging and the extra fee. So that's more or less what we're seeing in that space. But in the active space, so where people are really stock picking, we do see actually that some of these sustainability funds tend to be a bit more expensive. And I think that's driven by what you've described, because then those quote unquote stock pickers are just going the extra mile basically and want to get rewarded for it. And the other thing here is you tend to sometimes have kind of smaller funds, and so you cannot just kind of roll the cost over your billions and billions of assets under management or tens of billions, but you have to kind of just make do with the smaller pool of capital that you're trying to allocate. And then but even here, everyone who's obviously depends on the strategy, but active stock pickers are busy doing a lot of work anyway. So even if you're active and not considering sustainability, doesn't mean you're not that busy. So you're going to be expensive in the active space, whether you're doing sustainability or not. But that's where we do see, there's some research from ESMA, as I said, sees a bit more price differential.
Okay. And so now let's make a thought experiment. So we want really to invest in climate solutions or in the funds that will drive and finance the transition. So, and what are the criteria that a listener can use right now to assess if his or her portfolio is sustainable? Is there a list?
Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Here's your bucket list. I think there's a couple of pretty straightforward ways to think about it, right? One of them is fossil fuels. This is just such a pain point, and that's where most of global emissions come from. And so if you want to invest in a fund that doesn't have fossil fuels, then that's a good place to start. there's actually a huge debate in sustainable finance around the topic of fossil fuels. Unsurprisingly, once a bunch of nerds get into a room, there's 3 nerds and 5 opinions. I think that's a pretty safe bet. But, as a principle, the first question is, what are you going to do with fossil fuels? How are you going to think about it? Mm-hmm. Do you want to, exclude them? And if yes, all of them? And if not, do you want to say, okay, I want actually to kind of use my money to vote with my power and to vote in shareholder resolutions and to vote against high carbon strategies or what have you, or vote for climate plans? So that's part 1 of the checklist, right? And part 2 is already, I think, really important, not always easily accessible for retail investors to see, but how is the asset manager voting with my money actually? So how is it just somebody that's saying, look, we're going to allocate this money to some greener companies and then we sit back? Or are they actually, they're using this beautiful English word, stewardship? Are they stewards? Are they captains on this ship, which is your pension plan or your retirement plan or your savings for a house or a boat or whatever you want your money to do in your life? Are they really captains that have their hands on the steering wheel and are driving this ship forward basically in a way that aligns with your values? And then the third thing you already talked about, right, is really trying to look into scaling green solutions. And I think the intuition obviously is renewables, but and the EU has come up with this green taxonomy, which is pretty hotly contested because it includes gas and nuclear, which I think most listeners will think is somewhat problematic for a green taxonomy. But it's actually to really think about green solutions beyond renewables, and that's really where you can have a lot of impact. If we think coal is so bad, then beef and lamb, for example, is the coal of the food sector. I mean, it accounts for roughly 40% of our food carbon footprint. The difference between going vegetarian, vegan is about 20%. The difference between going standard diet to no beef and lamb is about 40%. So that's kind of the coal of the food sector. And there's all these awesome companies that are doing, alternative meats and meat-free solutions and so on and so forth. So I think that's my checklist would be, what's your view on fossil fuels? Are you really going with somebody who's a steward of your money, or just sitting back and, reweighting the deck chairs on the Titanic, and then really thinking about really cool green solutions and investment opportunities in the green space? And as we just said, obviously, as you go into this more dynamic space, you might take on more risk, but you also may have more return potential. But we should not be blind, we should be clear-eyed about the fact that some of the more disruptive technologies may carry more risk and then obviously more return potential. But I think what I always say also to people who talk to me about investment opportunities is, don't think that not worrying about this topic is a risk-free strategy either. And that's, I think, what you said a moment ago, right? So yeah, this is capital's at risk, as the adage goes, and that's true whether you think sustainability is a problem or not.
Exactly. Actually, not thinking about where your money is invested is also not a risk-free, because the world is changing, and at some point fossil fuels can become also stranded assets that will lose in value, and that's your investment will suffer as well.
I mean, it's, we just to pick up on this point, I think you made at some point, actually we know this is not actually when we in the climate science community talk about, okay, we'll have the planet will warm with 2 degrees or 3 degrees or 4 degrees or 5 or 6. The thing is, even a planet that's 6 degrees warmer will still be zero carbon at some point. Stabilizing temperatures requires decarbonization. So the only debate we're having is whether we want to start decarbonizing when the planet is 6 degrees warmer, or 5 or 4 or 3 or 2. That's the debate, not whether we should decarbonize. So I'm, for one thing, let's get on with it. Why are we waiting? Because we have to do it at some point. And that means that, there is the zero carbon future is inevitable, effectively. The question is obviously how you get there and how you steer your investments over which time horizon to make sure that you're prepared for it and ideally contributing to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like your 3 criteria list. I may just want to specify a bit more on this fossil fuels and voting, because I think it's important that the person who decides knows exactly, like, if it wants to get rid of the fossil fuels, saying, okay, this cannot be green, we can leave it immediately. Or if it does decide to invest in the fossil fuels, really have to check if the fund in which it invests makes all the necessary voting and actions to drive the companies to transition. So it's not just sitting on the portfolio. So just wanted to make it clear again. I think it's super important, this decision. And probably people have different opinions on this.
Absolutely, they do. And that goes back to, again, I think what we're also trying to do on our MyFairMoney platform is, when we work on this topic every day. So we have more opinions that can fit on to one podcast. I think we can have 50 podcasts with all my opinions. Unfortunately, it's probably one of my character flaws. But if you're not dealing with this topic, what opinion should I actually have about this, right? Like, your first intuition is, why are we even debating this? Fossil fuels are bad. I don't want to invest in that, so I don't want to deal with it. But it's a bit more complicated than that, and doesn't mean that first intuition is wrong, but it may mean that you want to try and actually, what we want to do on the platform is help you interrogate what you're trying to do. And then if at the end of the day, you don't have the bandwidth for this because you have a busy life and are overwhelmed anyway, then go with the stuff off the shelf. That's also a path on the platform, right? Just, okay, look, I don't know anything about this topic. I want somebody else who said this to deal with it, and they figured out what is good, and I'll just invest in that. But there are obviously some people who actually feel they want to try and interrogate a little bit how they want to navigate this conflict or this tension that you describe, and hopefully we can try and help them do that a little bit on this platform.
Yeah, no, that's very important. And so what a person should know, ask, or pay attention to when meeting a financial advisor?
So, I mean, we already talked about it quite a bit, but I think one thing that's really important for a person to know is that when you go into the supermarket, and I'm sorry, I'm always using the supermarket example, but I think it's everyone.
Very
I think every
illustrative.
one of your listeners has been to the supermarket, so we can all relate to this experience. You say, look, I want to buy, I'm doing a barbecue and I want to buy some chicken wings. And they say, oh, we don't have chicken wings. We just have chicken thighs. So, all right, that's cool. That's not allowed in finance. When you go to your broker, they have to just offer you funds that are suitable for your investment objectives. So the key thing that I tell everyone is, I can give you kind of the technical stuff. You could go on our platform if you want to find out about that. But the key thing you need to know is that you have the power. There are a lot of rules since post-financial crisis to prevent, you getting sold a bunch of subprime stuff or what have you. And this power means that they are not allowed to sell you products that aren't suitable for what you're trying to achieve. So don't be intimidated, because you're obviously in a situation where you typically have less information. You're the customer. They want your business, and they are legally required to take your money only if and when they have funds that are suitable for what you're trying to do with it. So make sure that you are forceful in your convictions and how you express them. That's the key to success in these conversations. That doesn't mean it's confrontational. They are there to advise you. I'm not suggesting that they're trying to kind of rip you off or anything, but they can only really do that in an effective way when you speak to your convictions. And that's really important in these conversations, more than the technical knowledge about what to do, is that you represent your ideas and your goals. And when you do that, you have the legal protections on your side, and you will, I think in many cases, also be in a good position to get where you want with your money.
Yeah. So, well, essentially, you go to the supermarket, you know exactly what you want to buy. So you go to the financial advisor, you should know exactly what you want to get. And the platform should help you with the checklist, etc., to know what to form your vague ideas about the values into very specific, probably financial terms that you need to know to do the right investments.
So when I go to the supermarket, I know what I want, and then I always buy something else. So this is what we don't want in finance. In the supermarket, it's okay. That's my point. In finance, that should not happen. You should get what you want. And
Exactly.
Don't be like me is basically my advice to my friends who ask me about this.
And so, okay, now we know exactly what we want. We go to the financial advisor. We lay out very clearly what we want. We want the product with a positive impact for the environment to address climate change. Can we be sure that we will get the product we want and that the product that we want will get the right impact?
I wish I could say yes, but no. This is really hard. Like most financial advisors aren't trained on this topic. The market is still finding its feet. So I don't think that you can just say, yeah, once you've done all your homework, you can be sure. And again, that's where, what MyFairMoney tries to do is give you this independent perspective. So once you've talked to your financial advisor and they said, look, this is great fund, you should invest in that. You can go on our platform and kind of do your own due diligence a little bit, right? And kind of see how comfortable you feel about all this. But, the big gap is like in a lot of different areas, if you try and figure out how social change works, you really quickly realize that it's hard to trace your impact and your role and in this big world that we live in. And that's I think that's one where we need to just do our own due diligence and make sure that we're on the right track.
Right. So even if you said clearly what you need, you still better check what is in the fund that you were offered. And if the funds really do what they say they would do, right? So like if a fund is called ESG or environmental, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will have the impact that you expected the fund to have.
For
right?
Sure. And I think that's definitely the case. But I would also say you can also, sometimes we have this problem of it's like an all or nothing thing in sustainability. Like either you do your due diligence and you do your research and you go to our platform and then you talk and you go to our platform again. And this is a lot of time that you need to invest, if you really want to do it right. But if you don't have that time, then it's also good to just start. And I think that's, I want to avoid listeners feeling like, okay, either I do nothing or I have to spend like 100 hours figuring this stuff out. I mean, it is really important. If you think about time you spend on anything else in your life, it's ridiculous how little time we spend with our financial planning. It's a huge problem in society, actually. But at least when it comes to the sustainability part of your financial planning, there are pretty low transaction cost solutions that can at least get you started. And then when you have maybe a little bit more time in the summer break, then you can do your own extra due diligence and take those extra steps, but don't feel like it's an all or nothing attitude.
Yeah, it's actually a suggestion that I get from so many guests when we talk about different fields of sustainability. On sustainability topics, we just have to start somewhere and progressing step by step. So we don't have to, from tomorrow, stop eating meat or investing in fully sustainable solutions.
I mean, it's actually so there's this beautiful turn of phrase in John Steinbeck's book, Tortilla Flat, where he says that God speaks in tiny causes. And I think sustainability speaks in tiny causes as well, right? Everything. I just mentioned the beef and lamb. I was always saying I couldn't swear off meat. It's to my, I hate to admit it. But when I realized if you just cut out beef and lamb, you can have such a big impact on your footprint. Then it became different because, then, okay, that feels manageable, at least as a first step, or just saying I won't, do this on weekends or what have you. And, streaming Netflix in standard definition has about a quarter of the carbon footprint as high definition. So that feels doable. I have to stop streaming Netflix entirely, maybe. That's up to you. But, that feels doable. And it's these tiny causes that can actually have dramatic effects on your sustainability footprint. And unfortunately, we have this PR crisis where we're permanently faced with the fundamentalism of the climate crisis. And so we feel like the only way to respond to that fundamentalism is to be fundamentalists ourselves. Whereas in the words of John Steinbeck, God speaks with tiny causes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like what you said about the changes. So like when you start with a small change, you really feel reassured and you feel empowered, and you feel the power to make another change, which is a little bit higher and a little bit more difficult, but you already have enough energy to make it.
Yeah. It's the energy of once you're in motion of a train, effectively. The hardest thing is often leaving the station. It's not actually driving down the road.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me, what is your preferences for sustainable investments?
For me personally?
Yes.
Oh my God, I don't know if I can answer that question. To be honest, when I think about this topic, I really think that where I really put my focus on sustainable investment is to go into, some of the more advanced areas of green technologies. So I'm really intrigued by, and again, there's no investment advice, but fund managers like Web Asset Management in the UK that really have small cap, mid cap, so kind of not the large multinationals, but growing companies. I think that's interesting, and it what it really does is it makes you care. Because you really feel like you're invested in you're actually invested in, not just with your money, but also with you're invested in the kind of other sense of the word, being invested in something. Like I'm invested in my family and invested in my life. I'm invested in this vision of this fund. And so that's where I lean towards, actually. But I'm also just so bruised by working in sustainable finance for 10 years that I just when I just see the word ESG fund, I just get like heart palpitations. But not to swear people off it, but that's where that's what gets me going. Is really these very interesting, cool things. And then, as we said, maybe it's higher risk, high return potentially a little bit, right? But again, we don't have to put your entire money in this thing. You can say, look, maybe I do like 80%, 90%, 70%, right? Whatever you feel comfortable with, and something a little bit more off the shelf, even with an ESG bend, and then a little bit of money in something where I maybe have a higher risk tolerance. So that's kind of where my head is at.
So what you mentioned sounds for me like Warren Buffett's advice. That so he really takes care of selecting the company that he is ready to go for years. So it's an investment not just to profit from the market moves, but really checking the management, the soundness of the attitude of these managers, and then investing in the development of this company because you believe this is a good company. Yeah. So that sounds very much like
I mean, I'm definitely like Warren Buffett 100%. I will take, sure. Sure, I'll take it.
And no, just to mention, I think there is also still a long way to go to improve the sustainable investment also from the regulation point of view. So because like all the issues that we discussed is also because it's probably relatively new, and there are efforts, well, at least by the European Union, there are different initiatives, but there is still a way to go in terms of disclosures and reporting and labeling and standards, etc. So hopefully it will be much easier, like relatively soon. Right?
Indeed, I think so. I mean, it's as soon as you give, policy making is like making sausages, right? You don't want to know what went into it, but I do think that there's a lot of policy momentum behind this, and on the whole, the hope is, of course, that helps consumers effectively, right? Because that's what it's about. It's helping you wield your power, and I think from that vantage point, we're going in the right direction.
Yeah. You sound really like French. You're using so many food examples.
Yeah, I lived in France for a couple of years, and it rubbed off on me. I don't know. It's just a way, when you talk to people about food, then we can all speak the same language, I think. And this is a big part of sustainability discourse, is to get us to actually understand each other better. So if talking about sausage factories helps, then I'll take it.
Yeah, no, that's true. Sustainability is very much of making it tangible and real right now, not something abstract somewhere like in 50 years.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, it's funny you should say that, right? So I'm actually writing a book right now, and the title of the book is called Kill Score, because I think one of the challenges that we forget in sustainability is that non-sustainable behaviors kill. So climate change kills, which means that when we contribute to climate change, we kill. And studies suggest that probably in our lifetime, we kill about one person with our consumer carbon footprint alone. And, we end up couching everything in CO2 emissions or some sort of social indicators or temperature scores and all these other indicators. But distilling, there's a truth is that the poster we see at the demonstration that says save the planet, this is the people that we need to save as well, right? They're the first victims of our behaviors. The planet will be fine.
Exactly. It will be even better. No, it will be even better.
Well, yeah, I mean, the way we're headed. And I think that's an important realization is that we are, and by the way, these people are not just anonymous climate death in 100 years. Last year, a 6-year-old boy died in the town of, sorry, it's not last year, I think two years ago now this happened. So 6-year-old boy dies in the town of Toyota in Japan of a heat stroke. And, then we have scientists who later proved that heat wave was a result of climate change. And that's a 6-year-old boy, that's a family that will never be able to, those parents will never be able to see the world the same way again. Yeah, and the reason they won't is because we decided to sacrifice these lives at the altar of our pleasures, of our consumption choices, and of our trips, and so on. And I think questions of guilt are complicated, but what really matters is not to go and do penance in a monastery, but just to understand that, and then to make the choice about whether we want to continue to engage in this type of behavior or not.
Yeah. Oh, this is a tricky question. So what really works better? A guilt that and the very, dark future of many people dying because of this, or a rather positive future, like, a beautiful picture of how the society will work once we achieve the sustainability goals, because it's also not about negative. It's really about having a much better society in the future.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think the reason, I want to have this conversation about death is not to guilt trip. That's not the objective. But if I had a friend who had a long distance relationship between Berlin and London, so is she now not supposed to fly because of the carbon footprint and sacrifice her love? No, that feels on its face silly, right? I mean, you think this is love. You cannot not do this. This would be an insane thing to do. But I think I don't really see the point to guilt trip, but to really fully understand the consequences of our actions, not to feel guilty about them, but to just make educated decisions about what we want to do. And, if we go back to, is beef and lamb worth it for us? And there's this, beautiful restaurant in Rue Sainte-Anne in Paris. It's this Japanese restaurant street, I guess, and it has just this amazing sukiyaki, this Japanese sukiyaki, if you go there like once every 2 years, I eat beef there. Don't tell anybody, okay? But
nobody will know.
A thoughtful, I wield my power as a consumer, whether with my money for investing or my money for consumption, thoughtfully.
Exactly.
I weigh the choices and I make sure that it's worth it. And that's, I think, then guilt tripping, few people do anything because of guilt actually at the end of the day. So it's I think you're right, both highlighting what a better future we will have, cleaner air and all these nice things, but also just making sure that this kind of like guilt momentum is not there to guilt us, but to make sure that we just have all the information we need to make intelligent choices about our values and our goals and the value of and the power that we have with our footprint to change the world, and then people can make their own choices.
Exactly. And the awareness is super important about everything, like why we make these decisions to go with this person and with that person, or why we decide to go for this work and for the other. The same with sustainability, like the awareness, why we make these decisions and aligning the decisions with our values. That's the key for happiness and satisfaction.
Yeah. And that's, as you say, that's a good story. That's not a bad story. That's a good story.
Yeah. And actually, I didn't plan to ask, but let me ask, since you mentioned, what do you think about offsetting? So like, okay, this friend of yours goes Berlin, London by airplane. Maybe she can use some solutions like tree planting or some other solutions. What do you think about it?
So offsetting is just a quagmire of challenges, right? We've had all these wildfires in California last year burn down thousands of acres of carbon offset built trees, and all those offsets are banked, but the trees are no longer there because the wildfire burned them down. So we have it's really a messy business. But I think it would be good for, just as a consumer or investor, let's not start by calling them offsets, because offset seems to suggest I've offset the whole thing. I can fly, and now I do this other thing, and now I'm sort of balanced. It's probably not exactly how it works. But if we just started calling them something more like making it a little less bad or helping make it a little bit better, again, in the positive spin, I think once we think about that, it's not a bad idea, Hey, yeah, let's do that. Let's plant some trees. Let's think about carbon capture systems. Let's, invest in green, whatever we're doing here. There's other offsetting mechanisms. I use the word myself now, but I think we just really have to understand that we're not actually offsetting our footprint fully. In most cases, there are exceptions, but in most cases, we're just trying to rebalance a little bit. And when we understand that, that's not such a bad, that's not such a bad thing, but the best, it's not offsetting our footprint. We shouldn't believe it is.
Yeah. It's not like you do it and everything goes back as if you didn't do it.
Sustainability is not the Catholic Church. That's not the way it works.
Okay, so tell me, what is your journey with sustainability? When was the wake-up call and how did you realize that's important?
I didn't really have this wake-up call, I think, until very recently, even though I've worked on sustainability for a very long time. I think I got into sustainability because I was fascinated by commodities, food commodities, the food price crisis in 2011. Yeah, that we're refacing now, exactly. And that was fascinating. Energy commodities, and it got me into kind of commodity finance, it got me into finance, and then it got me into energy finance, and it got me into climate finance, right? So that's sort of my journey, actually, which is, I don't have a sustainability training or real kind of background. This is all things I've learned working in sustainability for 10 years, but I never studied it or anything like that. And I think that's, so I would say the way I got into sustainability is because one of the things that makes sustainability fascinating to work in and to explore and to tackle is the way it helps us kind of almost see the world with an X-ray. We kind of see connections between things, the supply chain here, the labor issues here, and how that affects something on the other side of the world. And what is actually in a product? What is in a ton of cement? And where does the carbon come from that ton of cement? And how do these things interact with each other? So yeah, exactly. I think the reason I found this world fascinating is because thinking about sustainability is almost like walking around with an X-ray machine. And that's just fascinating, I think. And when I overcome that, now, that doesn't mean I don't care about sustainability, don't get me wrong, but I think sometimes we feel like if you're interested in sustainability, then you have to be kind of a squishy or a tree hugger. And it's like, you kind of really want to fight the power. And I think there are many different ways to explore and understand sustainability that can be really fascinating and challenging in a way that isn't just about being a good person. I think people can work in sustainability. They don't have to be good people. They can just be have a real intellectual interest and curiosity into what holds the world together in its innermost parts, if you will. So that's my professional journey, is actually more along those lines. Again, that may be embarrassing to admit on a sustainability podcast but I think it maybe helps us be a bit more honest that we're, sometimes, I'm not any better than anybody else working sustainability or anywhere else. It's just where life throws you sometimes.
Yeah, that's fine how you start. But then when working on these topics and understanding, so as you say, seeing everything with the X-rays, I mean, I don't know how you can really continue the same lifestyle as you had before when understanding and being aware of all the things happening.
Yeah, but I agree with you 100%. But I think that for me wasn't like this moment, you know what I mean? Because that was your question, right? Is there like this moment of like, now I have seen the light? And I think you just kind of you're like, yeah, I mean, I was doing some research recently on the avocado wars in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And there's these avocado wars. I mean, there's like people being hung off bridges, and it's not because of drugs, cocaine, it's because of avocado. There's 19 people dead on a bridge because of avocados. How many avocados do we sell in the world and so on? But, see that you're like, I'm good. I don't really want to be involved in this business. It's not something I'm into. And I think that's more where you have these kind of situations where you say, okay, or maybe you say, okay, I'm not going to throw the avocado away when I'm at a brunch or whatever, or, I also don't eat cheese. So all of a sudden in many brunch spots, you really have to kind of go the avocado or the cheese route. And then it's like, okay, which vice do I choose? But again, we're at food. I don't know. This is a food podcast now. Sorry, listeners. You thought this is a sustainability podcast, a food podcast. No, but I think that was more that reality. And it's more this kind of like, yeah, I actually don't think that's not on, as the British people would say. And that's been more my journey of trying to, like, as we talked, tiny causes, right? Like cutting out, changing my consumption one piece at a time, rather than saying, waking up tomorrow and foraging off the land and, throwing away all my consumer goods.
Okay, no, I think it's totally fair to say it was not an immediate realization after which you decided like completely change your lifestyle, stop eating meat, stop flying, etc., stop watching Netflix. But when you realized like this with the avocado, that people are dying because of avocado, or that there is a huge increase in carbon footprint because of the meat production. I mean, you still, because you're aware of the problems, you still start changing your way, because otherwise it's just inconsistent. No? Like you.
No, I mean, obviously that's, I think, I mean, it's not obvious actually. I don't think you can, I don't think I am at all live up to my own goals on this topic. And I don't say that with any, it's like quite upset about this, to be honest. It's like a source of shame for me, that's just my personal experience, that I feel like I'm not living up to my own expectations about how I want to consume and live my life. But it would be absolutely, I think, psychopathic behavior almost, or sociopathic behavior, to be confronted with these truths and not change your life.
Exactly.
Cannot, but so it doesn't mean that you are kind of become an angel, but
exactly. But you're not a saint. The life continues. There are a lot of problems with the life apart from sustainability, but making an effort and at least aligning a little bit with which become your value, right? Because you worked on it and you realized how important it is. So. And that's what we mentioned just earlier. Sorry, you mentioned that it's not all or nothing. So it's in a way it's a path.
Yeah, it's a path indeed, and that's it's a hard one. If I don't think it's easy, not necessarily because it's so much harder to live sustainably once you get there. But as we said before, you have to change things, and we're habit creatures, and this is how we've always done it. I've always had my coffee in the morning, whatever your habits are. And then all of a sudden, oh, I don't want to do coffee anymore because this and that, or I don't want to eat beef anymore. And I love this entrecote restaurant in London and just want to go there. And, this is just kind of changing our habits a little bit, because our habits are to consume unsustainably. We've been raised in this way for 30 years, and changing that is not trivial.
Yeah. No, changing habits is always difficult, indeed. Okay, now there is another topic which I found really fascinating about you. So it seems that you have most of your projects really non-profit. So, and I would probably can call you like a social entrepreneur. I don't know if you would agree with this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would be interested to hear about your views about this, and also maybe how do you really get funding for your projects, like also for your living, like if you do non-profit projects?
Yeah. So I think, what we try to do as an organization is basically incubate sustainability solutions in a pre-competitive space. There's a lot of jargon, right? Pre-competitive, incubate, and so on. What that really means is that we have a problem. And the first question we ask is, how can we solve it? Before we try and ask the question, how can we make money solving it? How can we sell it? So that's what my organization does, is it finds problems and tries to fix them. That sounds a bit bold, but that's what we try to do. And by doing that in a pre-competitive space, or kind of in this non-commercial, non-profit space, it gives us the space to try and explore whether this should be a public good, the solution, or a commercial good. And often we think, well, public goods are great. Let's have all the more public goods, the better. But it's not necessarily actually true. I think, working in the nonprofit sector, I often see organizations that have maintained so-called public goods. And I think this should just be a product sold by a company. This is not a public good. We shouldn't have taxpayers or philanthropies, or, somebody should pay for this good. It's not public. And so, that's also not a good thing when we use taxpayers' money to prop up goods that are not actually public, that are private, and that should be paid for privately, right? And this is.
Can you think of an example?
So, we had this idea around a model to measure whether portfolio is consistent with climate goals. So the problem we had was we don't know whether this portfolio is consistent with climate goals, and then we built a model to try and figure this out. And we built this in the pre-competitive space, and we built a model, and then we built these kind of data frameworks around this model. And when we looked at the thing, we said, all right, this model should be maintained as a public good, because it's a standard that governments can use, and it means that it's kind of create comparability. And there is this political goal to achieve the objective of aligning financial flows with climate goals. We need a public good model to maintain this question, or to respond to this question. But the data itself is, I don't think, necessarily a public good. So we spun off the data into a commercial arm, and then we eventually kind of spun this off as a commercial enterprise, and worked on it this way. And the public good, the model itself, remains as a public good, and it's funded by governments and philanthropies, and it does quite well for itself and pays everyone's bills and puts food on the table.
Right. So essentially, if a company wants to assess how it performs on the climate goals, it can pay for it. But the methodology is available for everybody.
Yeah, I think there is also a basic model that's also available for everyone, which you also don't have to pay for. But yeah, if you want all the data and if you want all the kind of ins and outs, then there is a paid for version, and that's the difference.
Okay. And where does your entrepreneurial spirit come from?
I honestly would never have imagined in my entire life that I would be calling myself an entrepreneur. First of all, because it's maybe a little bit pretentious, a tiny little bit. And second, because I don't think it's not really my personality, but I'm not the entrepreneur that you think about in the entrepreneur sense of like, oh, I'm kind of dashing building businesses and, coming. It's more just, I think I'm more like, in the Donald Duck series, this inventor, I forgot the name now.
Yeah.
Kind of like sitting in his shed and he's got like all these crazy inventions. So I just really love like tinkering. And I love taking the time to tinker on many different things. And I've just been, somehow this has turned me into trying to then turn what I tinker with in the garage into reality. And if you want to do that, you have to be an entrepreneur. So it's a little bit more like all right, I guess I'll have to do this to get my crazy inventions out there. But, the other thing is that sounds, I think, quite self-referential, which it is. And, I'm proud of my achievements. So don't need to hide what I've accomplished. But I think the other thing is I also love is when you like to tinker, you also like to build. And it's just so cool to work with people who build on their projects. And so, if you are an entrepreneur who has many different ideas, you can only really be that person, I think, if you also support other ideas, right? There's like 5, maybe 3 to 5 good ideas you have in your life, and that's it. So if you have 10 different projects, then at least half of them are not your idea, but it doesn't mean you can't support and be a partner on that journey. So I really love that as well. Just like building things and kind of, for me, my job is a little bit like traveling to a new country every day, maybe not every day, but every month or twice a year. And that's how I feel about the work that we do. And yeah, if anybody likes to travel, they can appreciate it. It's a pretty good time.
Yeah, amazing. And actually, I think it's really great when one can feel proud of their achievements. I mean, that's how it should be.
Yeah, I know.
And I think you do have the right to be proud of your achievements. Because I really know the job you're doing. So, and I think it's really great. So I would give you this right to you.
All right, great. I'll make sure I'll take this part of the podcast and I'll put it into a little recording and just have it with me. And if anybody doubts me, I go, well, funny you should say that.
So our time is almost up. So any concluding remarks or takeaways to our listeners? That's one question that I have, and then 2 most inspiring books, and then you can decide whatever order you prefer.
All right, I'll start with the book. So you did tell me about this question. So
yes.
Obviously I've been spending the last weeks kind of thinking and going back and forth. It feels like having to pick a song at your funeral, it's like, this is a big choice and a big question. So I'm not sure I have the right answer, but I'll go for 2. The first one is Utopia of Rules by David Graeber. It's basically the anthropology of bureaucracy. And inspiring is a bit of a stretch for this book, but it really changed the way I looked at the world, because the book talks about the relationship we have to rules and how we have this relationship where on the one hand we feel like we need them, and on the one hand we reject them. We typically think there are too many rules in society. Anybody who's on pedestrian things, there are too many red lights, too many street signs, and whatever. But I have a 3-year-old son. And whenever I see him play, he makes rules all the time. It's just permanent increase of rules in any game that I play with him. Oh, now this is not allowed anymore, and this has to be done in this order. And when you step on this stone, then you have to hold your right hand up. And I mean, it's just an absolute fascist state in my household when it comes to playing games with my son. It's rules, 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 rules. And we have this funny relationship to rules. And I think this book really does a beautiful job of talking about this challenge and helping us understand the power and the threat that rules represent to society. And it's not that sustainability linked, but I don't think I was the mandate to be sustainability linked. So I thought I would choose that. And I actually want to name a fictional book, which is the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard. And this is just this incredible play. And it's existentialist and interesting. But one of the reasons I really love it is because it's the brevity of the tone of Tom Stoppard. And I do writing all the time. I write, every single day, reports, briefings, emails. And I just was so inspired by the way that you can use simplicity to communicate such powerful messages, and that we often complicate our language and our words and our lives. And truth is most often revealed in simplicity, and brevity is the soul of wit, which is, of course, a line from Shakespeare, and a line from Hamlet, which is where Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, is a derivative of that play. And I think that is the answer I'm giving to you now, is exactly not what this play is, which is sweet and concise. But I just found it so inspirational to realize that the power that simplicity and verbiage has to communicate a message. And every time I review anything I write, I think about this issue, actually.
And cutting 70% of what you've written.
Yeah, that's the goal. And sometimes starting from scratch. It's such a beautiful thing, actually. It's all the analysts that work on my team, I always say, you haven't lived in a think tank if you've written something and not started from scratch, then you're not doing something right. And that's a different topic, maybe for another podcast. But I do think it sometimes can be quite helpful. And yeah, what do we actually need? And anybody who reads these reports, sometimes they start with, in 2015, the Paris Agreement announced that they had these climate goals, or climate change is a big topic in society. Like, that's how often this report starts. And obviously I already get, let's get to the truth. No, let's have a conversation about the story that we want to tell. And there's nice to have, the flourishes of a story and narrative when I read my son a book, but when it's about discovering truth and communicating truth, I think we need often these outward limbs and flourishes tend to obfuscate, and I think that's not healthy.
Well, yeah, to discuss this, I think we'll need another podcast as well.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. So can you just repeat again this last book?
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead.
Okay.
By Tom Stoppard. It's actually a play, but we'll let it. Is that allowed?
Yeah, that's good. So right. I will put it on my reading list. Okay.
Yeah, you should. It's also very funny, actually. It's also very, very, very funny. It's also great.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jakob. I think that was really interesting, very useful about sustainable finance, and just a lot of fun as well. So,
yeah,
and all
food.
the best. And indeed. And I wish you all the best with all your projects. And
thanks, same to you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.